When we're looking at Genesis 1:14, where God said he created the sun and the moon and the stars, it was to determine the seasons, the days, and the years. That is referring to the biblical calendar, not the normal calendar that we use today. The calendar that we use was created by Julius Caesar. It was known as the Julian calendar. It was a pagan solar calendar. It's based totally on the sun. Now, it's a great calendar. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the one that God uses. And then Pope Gregory made it some adjustments, and it became known as the Gregorian calendar. But the problem is, it is based totally on the sun. The Muslim calendar, it's a great calendar too, but it is based only on the moon. This is why Ramadan varies from month to month as to when it occurs, because it is totally based on the moon.
In France, the Great Mosque of Paris intervened to settle a disagreement over the start date for Ramadan. There was no such debate over the end, as thousands turned out for Eid.
But God said we're to use a calendar that is based on the sun and the moon interrelating. This is so significant. I like to think of it this way. When I lived in Garden City, Kansas, that is right on a time zone. So people had to have 2 clocks because they could drive a few miles and it'd be an hour later. And when we wanted to meet each other for dinner or make phone calls, we would have to know, well, whose time zone, whose clock are we going to be on? So we needed 2 clocks. Well, it's the same thing. We need 2 calendars. We need our normal solar calendar because we're in this world, but we're not of it. God wants us to use his calendar, and the only way you can understand is by what God is trying to communicate to us is by being on his calendar. I think of it as a boss. If your boss tells you that he wants to meet you at 2 o'clock on Friday, and you tell him, I'm sorry, that won't work in my schedule, how about 3 o'clock on Monday? You're not going to have a job very long. Your boss determines the appointments that he wants to have with you. Well, it's the same thing we need to realize. The creator of this universe has a time clock. He has a day timer. He schedules the appointments of when he wants to meet with you. And so if you want to understand prophetically what God is saying to us in these days, the key to unlocking God's signals is to understanding the feast days, the biblical calendar, and the signs that God uses.